Anybody? Recurrent pregnancy loss, right? So what is RPL? RPL is recurrent pregnancy loss. Anybody can come up with a definition of RPL? What do we mean by recurrent pregnancy loss? Recurrent means what? Repeatedly there is pregnancy loss. But repeatedly means what? How many times? Any idea about it? So as we can see that all over in our normal population there is 1% chance that they can suffer from recurrent pregnancy loss. But suppose this couple has suffered from pregnancy loss for the first time, what is the risk that she will suffer for next pregnancy loss? That is 5%. And as the number of pregnancy losses keeps on increasing, the risk for the recurrent pregnancy loss also keeps on increasing. Okay, so now coming to the definition. What is the definition of recurrent pregnancy loss? As per the latest guidelines, how do we define recurrent pregnancy losses? 2 or more pregnancy losses beyond the period of viability. What is the period of viability? That is from the date of being urinary pregnancy test positive to 24 weeks. That is beyond 24 weeks of gestation. If there is pregnancy loss, it is known as recurrent pregnancy loss. Whether it is consecutive or non-consecutive, it does not matter. So any pregnancy loss, any 2 pregnancy losses which is crossing the period of viability, that is more than up to 24 weeks, it is defined as recurrent pregnancy loss, right? As we can see over here that the pregnancy loss or miscarriage is defined as the spontaneous demise of pregnancy before the fetus reaches the viability. That is, the term therefore includes all the pregnancy losses from the time of conception, that is from the time of urinary pregnancy test becoming positive up to 24 weeks, that is up to the period of viability. And it should be noted that advances in neonatal care have resulted in small number of babies surviving birth before 24 weeks of gestation. However, different definitions are there. Now the distinction between the primary and recurrent pregnancy loss can be made. Now recurrent pregnancy loss can be of 2 types. One can be a primary recurrent pregnancy loss, another can be secondary recurrent pregnancy loss. What is primary? The couple never had a viable pregnancy, they do not have a living issue. The first time she got pregnant and first time there is a miscarriage or there is a pregnancy loss. Second time she got pregnant, again there is a pregnancy loss. So she is a case of primary recurrent pregnancy loss, that is there is no living issue or there is no viable pregnancy before. And what is secondary RPL or secondary recurrent pregnancy loss? That is, suppose she is having a living issue, she is having a kid of 5 years old or 6-year-old child is there already. Now she attempted to have another pregnancy and that resulted in a miscarriage. So she can be, next time she again got pregnant and again it led to miscarriage. So now she can be termed as what? She can be termed as secondary recurrent pregnancy loss. So pregnancy loss can be of 2 types, right? One is primary. Who is a case of primary recurrent pregnancy loss? Who never had a successful viable pregnancy. And who is a case of secondary recurrent pregnancy loss? Exactly. So how do we define recurrent pregnancy loss? What is the definition of recurrent pregnancy loss? Will you term one pregnancy loss, will you tell her this is a recurrent pregnancy loss? No. After 2 or more pregnancy losses, she can be termed as recurrent pregnancy loss. It might not be consecutive. Suppose today she is having a miscarriage, next time she is having a living issue. Then in the 3rd pregnancy she is again having the same pregnancy loss. Then also she can be termed as recurrent pregnancy loss. So what is the prevalence for the, as we have discussed, first pregnancy there is a risk of 11 to 13% of pregnancy loss. After one loss the risk increases, that is 14 to 21%, and after the second loss risk is increased significantly, that is 24 to 29%, and as the number of pregnancy losses increases, as we go down like first loss, second loss, third loss, it increases up to 31 to 33%. Now, what are the risk factors of recurrent pregnancy loss? What is the most important and most common risk factors for recurrent pregnancy loss? That is age, and most importantly it is maternal age more than that of the paternal age. As the maternal age increases, the chance of pregnancy loss also keeps on increasing. Now, the lowest risk is between 20 to 35 years and the risk rapidly increases after 40 years. Why? Because as the age increases, the chromosomal aberrations or chromosomal anomalies also increases. That's why we say maternal age is the most common and the most important prognostic as well as a risk factor for recurrent pregnancy loss. Another risk factor is stress. Another is BMI. So, what is the ideal BMI? We say less than 19 years is a risk factor for recurrent pregnancy loss, as well as more than 25 is the risk factor for recurrent pregnancy loss. So, ideal BMI for a patient is 19 to 25. We have to maintain the BMI between 19 to 25 to minimize the risk for recurrent pregnancy loss. Another is smoking and alcohol intake. So, these are the risk factors, overall risk factors for recurrent pregnancy loss. Now, coming up to the causes. What are the causes for recurrent pregnancy loss? 50% is unexplained. We don't have any reason. There is recurrent pregnancy loss, but it cannot be explained. It is idiopathic. Then second in line comes with the genetic causes. As we discussed that 5% is the genetic causes. Then 10% is the endocrinological factors like hypothyroidism, overt hypothyroidism, PCOS, overt diabetes. These are the risk factors for or the causative agents for recurrent pregnancy loss. These come under endocrinological factors. Then this is thrombophilias and immunological causes. This is another 10 to 15%. Then anatomical causes. It is another 10 to 15%. And male factors is 2 to 5% and infections are 2%. Infections come last basically. So, how will you evaluate? Suppose a patient comes to you saying, okay fine, I had 2 pregnancy losses, be it consecutive or non-consecutive. Now she comes up to you, how will you evaluate her? First of all, what will you take? You will take the history of the patient, right? Assess the age of the mother as well as age of the partner, that is the husband of the female. So, if you see that okay fine, the age is more, age is suppose 40 years. So, how will you counsel her? Okay fine, your age is more, the chances of chromosomal anomalies is more for you. So, chance of recurrent pregnancy loss might be there. Then how will you assess? You will take her BMI, you will assess her height and weight and calculate her BMI and check whether her BMI is coming under 19 to 25. Then also you know, okay fine, less than 19 was the risk factor and more than 25 is the risk factor. So, in between is the ideal. You will counsel her, that's way you have to lose weight, you have to gain weight and you have to maintain your BMI between that. Now, you check for what? You ask her several histories, whether she had any comorbidities or not, whether she had any hypothyroidism, whether she was taking medications for diabetes, whether she was hypertensive. So, you check for the comorbidities because what we learned, endocrinological factors are there which can lead to recurrent pregnancy loss as well. So, gestation as well as history, what will you ask her? At which gestational age her pregnancy losses were there? Last pregnancy till how much? Whether the pregnancy loss was in the first trimester, whether it was at 8 weeks, whether it was at 12 weeks, whether it was at 14 weeks, whether it had crossed 24 weeks or not. Because as per the definition, it is from urinary pregnancy test positive up to 24 weeks, we define it as recurrent pregnancy loss. Suppose she had a pregnancy loss at 34 weeks. So, this does not come under the definition of recurrent pregnancy loss, right? So, we have to take the history properly. At which gestational age her pregnancy loss occurred. Then take history about the menstrual cycle, whether their cycles were regular or not. The general physical examination we have to do. We have to take the family history, whether there was any history of congenital anomalies, whether any early losses, this is projecting towards the genetic causes, whether there was any other uterine instrumentation had been done or not, whether any previous pregnancy losses, after that any DNC or DNE had been done, there was any uterine anomalies, we have to check like that. Then exposure to any exogenous agents, and then radiation or chemotherapeutic drugs or chemicals, alcohol or caffeine intake which are very much toxic in a dose dependent manner. Then take history about her lifestyle, whether she is addictive to any smoking or any alcoholism is there or not, because they are also risk factors for this recurrent pregnancy loss. Then history of any thrombosis, whether she suffered from any cerebrovascular accident, there is any deep venous thrombosis or not, which is occurring spontaneously. This can be signs and symptoms of APLA syndrome, that is the antiphospholipid antibody syndrome. Whether she is having any PCOS or not, we have to take the history like this. Then general physical examination, that is systemic, gynecological examination as well as transvaginal sonography has to be done. Now coming to the genetic causes, which occupies 5% of the total thing. So what can be the genetic causes? Most importantly, what is aneuploidy? Aneuploidy is the most important contributing factor for this recurrent pregnancy loss. Especially aneuploidy causes what? Aneuploidy causes first trimester pregnancy losses. Suppose she gives you a history that she had 2 pregnancy losses at 8 weeks and at 9 weeks. So first important cause what strikes your mind is, it might be a genetic factor, the genetic cause might be there. You test for aneuploidy. For balanced chromosomal translocation, they most commonly causes what? They most commonly causes sporadic pregnancy losses. But if you find unbalanced translocations, they are usually associated with recurrent pregnancy losses. You should be very careful that balanced translocation causes what? Mostly sporadic, and unbalanced translocations usually are associated with recurrent pregnancy losses. See, as we have discussed, aneuploidy usually are sporadic, but most common cause, 50% of all first trimester losses are caused by this aneuploidy. So any pregnant patient coming up to us with the pregnancy loss at first trimester, that is within 12 weeks, and the first DD which comes to your mind is that might be a genetic cause, that might be a case of aneuploidy. Then how will you screen for the genetic factors? How do you know? How do you screen for them? You see, genetic analysis of the pregnancy tissue. That is a product of conception. Suppose she had a miscarriage. Now we take that product of conception and send it to the laboratory and test for whether there was any genetic abnormality in that pregnancy tissue itself, that is product of conception itself. But you have to know when you should test for the product of conception. It is said that after 3 consecutive first trimester loss or 1 second trimester loss, we go for genetic analysis of the product of conception. This line is very important. After 3 first trimester losses or 1 second trimester loss, you go for genetic analysis of the product of conception. Otherwise, we don't go. And what method is used? It is used by CGH. This is a genomic analysis method, how we test for genetic abnormality into the product of conception. And another thing what we can do to test for the genetic analysis is parenteral karyotyping, that karyotyping of both the parents. And when we do karyotyping of both the parents, if there is a previous history of congenital anomaly in the previous pregnancy, suppose he is having a living issue or previous pregnancy that has diagnosed with some congenital anomaly, prior to this conception, before when the patient comes for to you with preconception counseling, or prior to getting pregnant, she comes for planning of the pregnancy, what will you do? You will counsel her, okay, that your previous child had some congenital anomaly. So now you need to get your karyotyping done to check for any genetic abnormalities. This was one reason for getting parenteral karyotyping done. Another thing is that suppose she had 3 pregnancy losses, as we have studied, 3 pregnancy losses or 1 second trimester losses, the product of conception had to be sent for genetic analysis. But suppose she did it somewhere where these facilities were not available, or the product of conception has been discarded and you didn't get the product of conception for genetic counseling, then what will you do? You will ask for parental count, genetic karyotyping. Another thing where we do this parental karyotyping is this one. When unbalanced chromosomal abnormality is detected in the pregnancy tissue. Suppose she had 3 pregnancy losses in the first trimester and 1 second trimester loss, and you had sent that product of conception for genetic analysis. Now in that report it is mentioned that there is unbalanced chromosomal anomalies. Then you ask the parents that your karyotyping needs to be done. So what are the criteria where we do karyotyping of both the parents? Previous child or previous pregnancy had congenital anomaly. Second was genetic product of conception was not available for genetic analysis. And when we did genetic analysis on the product of conception, it was found that unbalanced chromosomal translocation is there. Remember what we studied? Here what we studied, balanced translocation causes mostly sporadic, but unbalanced translocations are associated with RPL. So that is why when the product of conception is showing unbalanced translocation, that is indicative of what? That they will undergo repeated pregnancy loss. Then you need to do karyotyping of both the parents. So most common genetic cause causing recurrent pregnancy loss is aneuploidy, more than 50% they are responsible, and sporadic is balanced translocation, and unbalanced translocation is associated with RPL. Now when we do this genetic analysis of the product of conception, not parenteral karyotyping. After 3 pregnancy losses in the first trimester or 1 second trimester pregnancy loss, we go for genetic analysis of the product of conception. And when we go for parenteral karyotyping available, and if the product of conception and genetic analysis showing unbalanced chromosomal translocation. So now genetic causes has been done. So coming to the metabolic and the endocrinological causes. First important cause is hypothyroidism. So if the patient is having subclinical hypothyroidism, then you have to treat it. You have to provide her with levothyroxine supplementation so that it gets treated. Now if the patient is having anti-TPO antibodies present, then also you have to treat the patient. So where do you treat the patient? Once it is hypothyroidism, subclinical hypothyroidism, or the patient is having anti-TPO antibody present, then you have to treat the patient with levothyroxine supplementation. Another thing is diabetes. Only uncontrolled diabetes is a cause of recurrent pregnancy loss. Then PCOS. PCOS mainly is related to infertility, and then also if it is causing recurrent pregnancy loss, most commonly it causes what? First trimester pregnancy losses. Then it is hyperprolactinemia. It has got very weak association with recurrent pregnancy losses. There is no such evidences, and luteal phase defect has no such association with recurrent pregnancy loss. Previously it used to be believed that luteal phase defect has some impact on recurrent pregnancy loss, but now recent studies have proved that there is no such evidence for recurrent pregnancy loss. What are the tests you should not do? Because most of the time whenever the patient comes to you, we write a number or a plethora of investigation which should not be given. What all investigations can, maximum what we can do is thyroid testing, that is TSH, and anti-TPO antibody. And these all testing we should not be doing. We should only, because insulin resistance is only having any association with recurrent pregnancy loss. Remaining C, they don't have any association, like free androgen levels, serum prolactin, ovarian reserve, luteal phase insufficiency, homocysteine levels. These do not have any evidences showing any association. So you should not be testing for all those things. So what were the causes, endocrinological causes? Only hypothyroidism, overt hypothyroidism, subclinical hypothyroidism, and anti-TPO antibodies if present. And diabetes if it is uncontrolled diabetes, then only you need to check for it, or else remaining they do not have any association with recurrent pregnancy loss. Now coming to the anatomical factors. What are the anatomical factors which can cause recurrent pregnancy losses? Most important anatomical factor causing recurrent pregnancy loss is Mullerian anomalies, that is the developmental anomalies of the uterus. Now out of that, most important cause is what? Most common and important cause is septate uterus, that is most commonly associated with recurrent pregnancy loss. Others are bicorporeal uterus or the hemiuterus. But most important cause, if have to ask the most important cause or most important Mullerian anomaly or most common Mullerian anomaly causing recurrent pregnancy loss is septate uterus, and it is curable as well. And then the next important is leiomyoma, that is fibroids. Now which kind of fibroid can cause maximum recurrent pregnancy loss? Can subserosal fibroid can cause recurrent pregnancy loss? So pregnancy tissues gets attached where? Into the endometrium, right? Into the endometrial cavity. Now if you have a fibroid which is occupying the endometrial cavity, so there will be pregnancy loss because the pregnancy tissue doesn't get any nutrition or any space to get attached. So what type of fibroid which occupies the endometrial cavity? That is submucosal fibroid. So most important cause for recurrent pregnancy loss in case of fibroid is submucosal fibroid. An intramural fibroid can cause pregnancy loss if it is distorting the endometrial cavity. Such a big intramural fibroid is there, that is it is projected into the endometrial cavity, then it can cause recurrent pregnancy loss. Then also if you are asked which leiomyoma causes recurrent pregnancy loss, it is submucosal fibroids. Then endometrial polyps, but there is no such conclusive evidence. Intrauterine adhesion, that is Asherman syndrome, mostly causes infertility and rarely causes recurrent pregnancy loss. Cervical insufficiency, it causes recurrent pregnancy loss, but it is most commonly causes mid-trimestral losses, that is early second trimestral losses, never first trimestral loss. And abnormal endometrial receptivity, some documents say, some papers says okay fine they cause, and but there is a lack of evidence. Some guidelines say they cause recurrent pregnancy loss, some guidelines say they do not cause recurrent pregnancy loss. So what are the anatomical factors we learnt about causing recurrent pregnancy loss? Most common is Mullerian anomalies. Out of Mullerian anomaly, which anomaly? Septate uterus. And second most common is leiomyoma, most common is submucosal leiomyoma. Another is cervical incompetency or cervical insufficiency, most commonly causing early mid-trimestral or early second trimestral losses. Now how will you screen for anatomical disorder? If you are suspecting okay fine this patient might have an anatomical problem, there is some developmental anomalies in the uterus. How will you screen for that? How will you know that this patient is having any anatomical problems? So the first screening method is transvaginal sonography or lower abdominal sonography, or most significant is the gold standard method is 3D USG, where we can reconstruct the entire uterine cavity and see whether it is a septate, whether it is a bicornuate, whether it is a normal uterine cavity, anything we can very well visualize. So 3D USG is 3D USG has high sensitivity and specificity to diagnose between septate and bicorporeal uterus. The sensitivity is 97.6%. Then comes sonohysterography, more accurate than HSG, and MRI, which is 90% sensitivity if 3D USG is not available. So first line of investigation is 3D USG. If 3D USG is not available, then we can go for MRI. And if both are not available, we can go for sonohysterography. 3D USG is 97.6% sensitive and MRI is 90% sensitive. And if I have to choose between sonohysterography or HSG, this sonohysterography is better than HSG. So now if you see that the patient is having some Mullerian anomalies or any anatomical anomalies, what you should screen more? You should screen for renal anomalies as well. Because often the Mullerian anomalies are associated with renal anomalies as well. So even when you are suspecting it is an anatomical cause and you are finding out on the 3D USG, okay fine, there is some Mullerian anomalies in the or the developmental defects in the uterus, then obviously you should always screen for renal tract assessment if Mullerian anomaly is diagnosed. This line is very important. If the examiner asks you, if suppose you have diagnosed a case of anatomical or Mullerian anomaly in a case of recurrent pregnancy loss, what more you need to screen? You always need to screen for renal tract assessment if Mullerian anomaly is diagnosed. And in case of acquired uterine malformation, what is acquired uterine malformation? Which uterine malformation you can acquire? Intrauterine adhesions you can acquire, right? That is Asherman syndrome. Because repeated dilatation and curettage can lead to what? Lead to adhesion formation between the two raw layers of the uterine walls, right? And it can lead to Asherman syndrome. So for screening of the Asherman syndrome, all women should have 2D USG to rule out any adenomyosis as well as this Asherman syndrome. So what were the screening tests we used for this thing? For diagnosing uterine anomalies? First line investigation was 3D USG. If 3D USG was not available, MRI. If both are not available, then sonohysterography, which is better than HSG, hysterosalpingogram. And if you are suspecting a Mullerian anomaly has been diagnosed, what all more investigation you need to do? Renal tract assessment. And for acquired uterine malformations like Asherman's and adenomyosis, 2D USG for the lower abdominal pelvis. Now coming to the thrombophilias, another most important cause of, that is almost 10 to 15% of the recurrent pregnancy loss is caused by thrombophilias. And out of thrombophilias, APLA syndrome or antiphospholipid antibody syndrome, almost 15%, single-handedly 15% is responsible for this recurrent pregnancy losses. So how will you diagnose APLA syndrome? What is the diagnostic criteria for APLA syndrome? How will you say, okay fine, she is having 2 recurrent pregnancy loss and most importantly this is due to APLA syndrome only. How will you know that? So we have, for diagnosis of antiphospholipid syndrome, we have one clinical criteria and one laboratory criteria. These 2 criteria should be made. One clinical and one laboratory criteria should be made to confirm, say that it is antiphospholipid antibody syndrome only. So what is the clinical criteria? Any arterial, venous or small vessel thrombosis event of any organ, including the superficial venous thrombosis as well. Any history of CVA, any history of venous thrombosis, any history of deep venous thrombosis, anything would lead to what? Sufficient for one clinical criteria. Or any pregnancy morbidity out of these 3. That is, 1 unexplained pregnancy loss beyond 10 weeks of gestation, having a morphologically normal fetus in USG as well as HPE. You should not be modifying any of these lines. This is very important. You will be asked for diagnostic criteria for APLA. Whenever you utter the word APLA syndrome, examiner will ask you the diagnostic criteria of APLA syndrome. This should be by heart. 1 clinical, 1 laboratory criteria. Out of clinical criteria, 1 is any prior history of thrombotic events. What is a thrombotic event? Any arterial venous or superficial venous thrombosis. It can be cerebrovascular accident, it can be deep venous thrombosis, it can be leg vein thrombosis, any kind of thrombosis, it is 1 criteria, or any other previous pregnancy morbidity. What all comes under this? That is 3 first trimester losses or 1 pregnancy loss more than 10 weeks of gestation having a normal, morphologically normal fetus. C. More than 1 unexplained fetal death of a morphological normal fetus as more than 10 weeks. If it is less than 10 weeks, see, This more than 3 consecutive spontaneous abortion before 10 weeks. So, before 10 weeks it should be 3, more than 10 weeks it should be 1. This is how you remember. Another is more than 1 premature birth before 34 weeks of gestation due to eclampsia, severe preeclampsia or placental insufficiency. Why placental insufficiency, eclampsia or preeclampsia we are taking into account? Because this might be due to thrombosis within the placental vessels. That is why we are telling this. So, pregnancy morbidity is, if it is more than 10 weeks, 1 morphologically normal fetal loss. If it is less than 10 weeks, there should be 3 losses and 1 history of preterm birth, more than 1 equal to 1 history of preterm birth which is occurring at less than 34 weeks, mainly caused due to eclampsia, preeclampsia or any other placental insufficiency. This is clinical criteria. Any one of the following will lead to sufficiency for one clinical criteria. And what is the laboratory criteria? Laboratory criteria is presence of lupus anticoagulant positivity on 2 occasions 12 weeks apart. Suppose today a patient comes to you with pregnancy loss. You assess her and then you suspect, okay fine, this might be a case of Apla's syndrome. Now you want to test her lupus anticoagulant. When you will order lupus anticoagulant antibody testing? Today, then and there, or you will ask to wait for like 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, till how many days you want to wait and then take the blood for lupus anticoagulant? Will you do the test immediately? No. If a patient comes to you with pregnancy loss today and you are suspecting this might be a case of APLA and you want to test for any of these antibodies, you wait minimum of 6 weeks. After 6 weeks, you take the blood for lupus anticoagulant. This is the first sample. Then you get the result and then ask her to get the test repeated after 2 weeks. Again you get the result. Then if it comes positive, then we say that okay fine, you are satisfying the laboratory criteria. Okay. So it is said lupus anticoagulant positivity on 2 occasions 12 weeks apart. Another line should be there, that is blood should be taken after 6 weeks of the pregnancy loss. Now another thing is IgG or IgM anticardiolipin antibodies in moderate or high titers, that is more than 40 or more than 99 centile is measured at least 2 occasions 12 weeks apart. So now suppose the result comes at more than 10 GPL, will you say it is a positive result? No, it has to be more than 40 GPL or more than 99 centile, then only it is a positive result. And another is anti-beta 2 glycoprotein 1 antibody in moderate or high titers, measured 2 occasions 12 weeks apart. Everything should be same. 2 occasions 12 weeks apart, more than 40 GPL, more than 99 centile, and blood should be drawn after 6 weeks of pregnancy losses. Any one of the following if it is there, we say the laboratory criteria is satisfied. Okay. And if it is asked that which is the most common antibody associated with RPL is lupus anticoagulant, and second most common is the anticardiolipin antibodies. So now we know that for the thrombophilias and immunogenic causes, what is the most important acquired causes? Apla syndrome is single-handedly contributes to 15 to 20% of all recurrent pregnancy losses. And if you are suspecting Apla syndrome, how will you diagnose this case? By looking at clinical criteria as well as one laboratory criteria. Now see, these are the acquired cause. We learnt about the acquired thrombophilias. Acquired thrombophilia was Apla syndrome. As we have learnt, postpone the test screening or blood testing, postpone until 6 weeks after the pregnancy loss and repeat test after 12 weeks as we have studies. And what all antibodies? Lupus anticoagulant, anticardiolipin antibodies. These are the 2 most important, and if you have to test, you can test for anti-beta 2 glycoprotein 1 as well. And what are the hereditary thrombophilias? We generally do not directly go for the hereditary thrombophilias until and unless there is some personal or family history of hereditary thrombophilias. See, not recommended except for resuscitating, as well as additional risk factors are there like personal or family history for thrombophilias. And what are the hereditary thrombophilias? What we can test for is protein C, protein S, antithrombin 3 deficiency we can test for, and factor 5 Leiden mutation we can test for hereditary thrombophilias. What are the hereditary thrombophilias? Protein C, protein S, antithrombin 3 and factor 5 Leiden mutation. And we test for these hereditary thrombophilias only if the patient is having any familial or any personal history of thrombophilia, then only we go for testing. Otherwise, this hereditary thrombophilia testing is only for research purposes, nothing else. For RPL workup, any patient is coming up to you, we first go for this acquired thrombophilia testing itself. And what are the two antibodies we take? IgG and IgM for what? Anticardiolipin, and most important cause was lupus anticoagulant and anticardiolipin antibody IgG IgM. These are the two first causes you say, and third cause is anti-beta 2 glycoprotein 1, but which has got maximum association, that is lupus anticoagulant. Now we come for this immunological screening. What are the immunological screening you can do is for anti-nuclear antibodies, that is ANA, and human leukocyte antigen, that is HLA. Maternal HLA class 2 generally could be considered in Scandinavian women with secondary RPL after the birth of a boy for prognostic purposes, but there is very much lack of evidences for testing for these antibodies, because these are not routinely practiced. In some selected cases where we know the prevalence of these anti-nuclear antibodies or this kind of HLA-DR2 antibodies are highly prevalent in those population, we test for them. This is not for the general population. If you are asked in exam that immunological screening, what are the investigations in anti-nuclear antibody and human leukocyte antigen, this much you need to know. Then male factor. What is the male factor? What can be the male factors? Most importantly, assess the lifestyle factors in the male partner, that is age, smoking, alcohol, exercise and BMI. What we say is, as the age increases or the bad lifestyle is there, as smoking or alcoholism is there in the male partner, what is the cause? It is sperm DNA fragmentation is associated with paternal age, unhealthy lifestyle like smoking, obesity and excessive exercise. So we can test for this sperm DNA factors only when other factors has been ruled out, right? Then only we suspect, okay fine, there might be some male factor is also associated with this pregnancy losses. If we see that male is smoking, he is having alcoholism, or that male is of 40 years or more, then we can suspect, okay fine, there might be some sperm DNA fragmentation is occurring for which it is contributing towards this RPL. So then we go for this testing of the sperm DNA fragmentation. Now what is the prognosis? The best prognosis depends upon the woman's age, her complete pregnancy history, including the number of previous pregnancy losses, live birth and their sequences. Now treatment of RPL with genetic background. What we studied that genetic causes, first trimester causes, most important was genetic cause, that was contributing to 5% of the pregnancy losses, and genetic cause, that most important cause was aneuploidy. Now if we know that there is some familial history of chromosomal abnormality, or we did the karyotyping of both the parents, and now we come to know there is some abnormality in the karyotyping. Now how will you treat them? How will you manage? What we can do is, we can ask for pre-implantation genetic testing. That is, when we are doing the IVF, we are taking the ovum and we are taking the sperm, and now we are doing the genetic analysis of both and seeing, okay fine, there is some aneuploidy or not. Suppose there is a 4 ovum we have collected and 4 sperms we have collected, and now we do the genetic mapping of both, and now we see that, okay fine, so ovum 1 and ovum 3 are having some genetic mutation, so we remove them and fertilize those who are healthy ovum and healthy sperm and get a healthy embryo. This is known as pre-implantation genetic testing. Or what we do is, we freeze the embryo, right? And then we test for genetic sequences of that embryo. and see which all the embryos are healthy, and then we transfer the blastocyst, the healthy blastocyst we transfer. That is known as pre-implantation genetic testing. Then natural conception with prenatal testing. Or else suppose we find that both the sperms and both the ovum are having some of the other defects. So what we ask them is, you better you go for donor ovum and donor sperm. Another thing is obviously adoption, so that they do not suffer from all these things. Then management for this endocrinological problems. As we have studied that overt hypothyroidism, subclinical hypothyroidism and thyroid autoimmunity. These three cases we need to treat them with levothyroxine supplementation. Now for this congenital disorders, what we study is anatomical factors. Suppose she is having, after we have diagnosed them with 3D USG we found out that she is having septate uterus. What will you do? Septal resection. Suppose she is having submucosal fibroid. What will you do? Hysteroscopic submucosal fibroid resection. Suppose she is having cervical insufficiency. Then how will you treat her? You will go for routine cervical length assessment, and you see, okay fine, the cervical length is less than 25 mm. At minimum of 16 to 24 weeks, you find that the cervical length is less than 25 mm, then you go for what? Cervical cerclage. And in case of acquired disorders like submucosal polyp, endometrial polyp, intramural fibroid distorting the endometrial cavity, intrauterine adhesion, what we hysteroscopic removal we do, myomectomy we can do, hysteroscopic removal we can do for mucosal fibroid and endometrial polyp. See, for cervical insufficiency also, history of second trimester losses, then we can go for serial cervical sonographic surveillance. And singleton pregnancy plus history of second trimester recurrent pregnancy loss, it can be attributable to the cervical insufficiency, a cerclage could be considered. Now treatment for unexplained infertility, unexplained recurrent pregnancy loss. What we studied at first is 50% is unexplained recurrent pregnancy, we do not have any cause. So some guidelines say that you do not need to do anything for this, you just only reassure the patient and rule out the other causes. And some guidelines say this per vaginal micronized progesterone supplementation twice a day might help to get a live birth. That is what it is written, may improve the live birth rate in a woman with 3 pregnancy losses and vaginal bleeding. That is, micronized progesterone 400 mg from less than 12 weeks to 16 weeks can be given. And high doses of intravenous immunoglobulin may improve the live birth rate, but there is some lack of evidence over there. We generally do not practice this. For if you ask what is the treatment for recurrent pregnancy loss which do not have any cause, unexplained, we reassure the patient, and some studies have said that micronized vaginal progesterone might help if she is having more than 4 unexplained pregnancy losses along with vaginal bleeding up to 16 weeks. Why up to 16 weeks? Because after that the placenta is fully formed and it has taken over the hormonal function and can produce sufficient amount of progesterone so as to lead the pregnancy to a live birth. And this high dose of intravenous immunoglobulin has as such no role, because we still lack the evidence to prove whether it is effective or not basically. Now the psychological impact of the recurrent pregnancy loss. We often say that obviously if the patient is repeatedly getting pregnant and getting affected by that, we need a psychological counseling as well, because it leads to additional stress, and often stress leads to what? Again the same thing, recurrent pregnancy loss. That is why they need some counseling as well. So list of investigation we routinely recommend is, so it is basically this, to summarize, whenever a patient is coming up to you with 2 or more pregnancy losses, whether it is consecutive or non-consecutive, what are the list of investigation that is routinely recommended? See, lupus anticoagulant, anti-cardiolipin antibody plus minus beta 2 glycoprotein 1, thyroid testing plus anti-TPO antibody, and for anatomical factors 3D ultrasound. If 3D ultrasound is not present, MRI or sonohysterosalpingogram. This is what we studied na, to rule out the genetic causes to rule out this thrombophilias, endocrinological causes and anatomical causes. And rarely in certain cases what we do is anti-nuclear antibodies, sperm DNA fragmentation and chromosomal array investigation for the pregnancy tissues. What we studied is it has got criteria, it has to suffice those criteria, that is 3 pregnancy first trimester losses and or 1 second trimester loss, then only you do genetic analysis of the pregnancy tissues. And in case of selective cases, we do parenteral karyotyping. Why? Because if this pregnancy tissues is showing unbalanced translocation, then only you go for parenteral karyotyping, right? Then we discuss what? In certain population only we test for this HLA antibodies, or else we don't do. This for only research purposes. That is why it is selective cases and not recommended is other metabolic or endocrinological markers. That is luteal phase defects. We do not test for all those things. These are obsolete methods. So summary of the treatment. For genetic defects, what we treat, what we studied. This is to summarize the entire class. Whatever we discussed, this only one chart you remember, this entire RPL is summarized. So for genetic causes, what is the treatment? Genetic counseling. If we find out any other abnormality, what we do is pre-implantation genetic testing, sperm donation, ovum donation or adoption. See, for antiphospholipid antibody, suppose the patient is diagnosed with Apla's syndrome. How will you treat her? You will treat her with aspirin plus heparin till 34 weeks of gestation. Now she is a confirmed case. One clinical criteria has been sufficient, one laboratory criteria has been satisfied. Now she is a diagnosed case of Apla's syndrome. Now you know her pregnancy losses, what might be a Apla's syndrome is causing that. Now you need to treat her. How will you treat? You will give her aspirin prior to the conception, and once the urinary pregnancy test becomes positive, you will start her on heparin, and she will continue aspirin plus heparin till 34 weeks of gestation. This is as per the ESHRE guideline, but if you follow RCOG guideline, they say aspirin plus heparin should be started from the day of urinary pregnancy test positive itself. What is the basic difference between RCOG and this ESHRE guideline is that RCOG says from UPT positive to 34 weeks aspirin plus heparin, and ESHRE says aspirin to be continued, to be started when she is planning pregnancy, and once urinary pregnancy test comes positive, then you add heparin. There is a basic difference between these two guidelines, nothing else. Then in case of uterine anomalies, there is some insufficient evidence on the surgical correction, but we say septate uterus, you go for septal resection. There is some polyp or there is some submucosal fibroid, you go for that resection. And in case you find out Mullerian anomalies, you go for screening for the renal tract anomalies as well. Now cervical insufficiency, serial surveillance in the pregnancy. For cervical length assessment, it is usually done between 16 to 24 weeks, and the cervical length is less than 25 mm, you go for cervical cerclage. And thyroid problem, levothyroxine for overt hypothyroidism, subclinical hypothyroidism and anti-TP, antibody positive hypothyroidism. High sperm DNA fragmentation, what we do is lifestyle changes, PIXI and ANA antibodies, no specific treatment is there. And unexplained RPL, what we study is vaginal progesterone only if 3 losses are there along with vaginal bleeding. Consider IV IgG only if 4 losses are there. So vaginal progesterone can be given if there are 3 pregnancy loss along with vaginal bleeding in current pregnancy, and IV IgG can be given if there is more than 4 pregnancy losses. Though IV IgG therapy is less preferred and there is very lack of evidence that whether it can cure or can lead to live birth or not. So this was basically the summary of this entire class. And what are the grey areas? See, different guidelines say different things. So this is the grey areas. There are some controversy regarding these topics, that is hyperhomocystinemia. Some guidelines say, some of the examiners or some of the professors might tell that hyperhomocystinemia is a cause of recurrent pregnancy loss. but there is lack of evidence. Some guidelines say they lead to RPL, some guidelines say they don't lead to RPL. So these are the gray areas of RPL. Then unexplained RPL, whether this progesterone therapy or IV IgG therapy actually leading to live birth or not. Some say it leads to live birth, the therapy is, some studies say therapy is working out, some studies say okay no, this therapy is not working out. Same with surgical correction of the uterine defects. Some guidelines or some studies say surgical resection of a septate uterus leads to live pregnancy, leads to live birth, often leads to a better outcome. Some studies say ki the outcome is same, whether you resect the septate or you do not resect the septum, the outcome is same. So these are the basically these are the topics where there is a gray zone. Like some say, some authors or some school of thought say something else and some say something else. So these are the gray zone. Basically you need to memorize and need to remember this. What are the treatments, what are the causes and how will you screen for those. And very clear about the definitions. 2 pregnancy losses, how will you diagnose Apla syndrome, what are the clinical criteria, what are the laboratory criteria, when you go for testing of these laboratory criteria, everything you need to know. When you give aspirin, when you give low molecular weight heparin or unfractionated heparin, this much you need to know.